everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
Man, last week's Post-PAX Pod episode was great. I'm really glad that we got to talk to all those people, and we recorded that amazing audio from PAX East.
Should we just include some audio about being really sad that it was canceled due to a swarm of locusts, just in case it does in fact get canceled due to a swarm of locusts?
Yeah, I'll be sure to include this segment of us talking about the swarm of locusts that may or may not have overtaken PAX East and Boston.
It was terrifying. We had to run and flee, and then also had to run. Should we also include one in case that it got attacked by a giant globular monster from outer space?
Yes, let's include that as well.
What other iterations? I'm just thinking back to like SimCity 2000 when you
I thought you were going for Plagues of Egypt.
No, I was going to like where if in SimCity 2000, if you were a destructive mayor, you could decide that you wanted to rain down horror onto your civilizations.
PAX East could then be canceled by a meteorite hitting the planet, or Godzilla.
Perhaps it was Godzilla when we were there because we released an episode about Godzilla.
Like we summoned Godzilla with our audio. Maybe, so you know how Godzilla attacks sometimes because he's really mad at humanity? Maybe we made him mad at humanity.
Well, anyway, regardless, I would say that we had a very successful PAX. We both came back hopefully alive, and that we enjoyed ourselves, and that you enjoyed the post-PAX Pod episode, which came before this episode. And this entire segment's kind of silly, but it's funny for us in the moment because we haven't gone to PAX yet. And by funny, I mean it's humorous to the point where I want to talk about it, but not necessarily think it's actually funny. Anyway, Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I was playing a game to prove that I don't just play Half-Life mods or first-person shooter games. I've been playing an RPG for the Game Boy Color called Frasier Fantasy.
Is that about the spin-off sitcom about the psychiatrist who was in... Does he live in Boston?
Yeah, well, in the original, he lives in Boston in Cheers.
Right, because he lives in Cheers. Does he move somewhere in Frasier?
Seattle.
Why does he move to Seattle so he doesn't run into
He moves back home to Seattle.
Oh.
But no, you're right. It is in fact based on Frasier, the TV show. It was developed by Edward LaBarbera. It's available for free on itch.io. Frasier Fantasy is in fact a turn-based RPG where you play as Dr. Frasier Crane, a radio psychiatrist. In the game, you must host the perfect dinner party to celebrate your new beautiful mother-of-pearl tableware set. However, standing in your way is your father, Martin Crane, Martin Crane's dog, Eddie, Martin Crane's live-in physical therapist, Daphne Moon, Frasier's brother, Dr. Niles Crane, eminent psychologist, his producer, Roz Doyle, and the numerous callers who dial into your hit show on KACL 780 Seattle Talk Radio. In the game, you play as Frasier. You go around and you are trying to set up the perfect dinner party, which historically is not easy for Frasier. And it's a bizarre, fun role-playing game. I'm a fan of Frasier, the show, and I'm also a fan of role-playing games. It's truly a perfect match. And it is a very loving tribute to all 11 seasons of everyone's favorite Cheers spinoff. It's just completely jam-packed with small references to like one-off lines and things that you probably, if you haven't watched Frasier as much as I have, probably would have missed. But it's enjoyable. I like it. It is an RPG, so there are combat segments. When you do combat, you have the option to either attack. When Frasier attacks, it's called a Freudian slap. And when you use your magic points, which are psychiatry magic, he will like deduce something about someone and it will cause mental damage to them. So it's you know, your usual flair of RPG, and it's just a kind of goofy game that the person who made it definitely cared a lot about the show and cares a lot about making a game feel authentic to a Game Boy game. In fact, it's so authentic, it's a ROM, meaning you play it in an emulator, or as I've been playing it on my Game Boy Color because I flashed a cartridge with the game. So I now have a cartridge of Frasier Frasier fantasy that I can play whenever I want, and I, in fact, likely will. Well, Seth, I've been playing Frasier, everyone's favorite character from Cheers. What have you been recently playing?
So recently I've been playing a game called Fable Done. I actually received it for my price of admission for Humble Bundle. Actually, Humble Bundle had a really good bundle, last bundle. The Humble Bundle did include a game called Fable Done. Fable Done was a game that was developed by Grenard Games and published by Dear Villagers and was released on May 13th in 2024. It's a city building game where you are in a kind of wholesome fairy tale world and everyone's kind of friendly. There is very little stress and you just have to take care of your villagers and find true love and live happily ever after. So there's different noble ladies that you can interact with. You can actually interact with whatever noble gender you wish to interact with, but you set your character's gender, you set the gender that you want to pursue, and then you get letters written from these noble ladies and you have to act on them, like they may want something or do something or so on and so forth while you're managing your village. And you start off, which is the city building portion, you start off with this tiny little cart and you have to add like a laborer's location, and then from a laborer's location you start building settlements, and from settlements you start building industry and farming, and then eventually winter comes and you have to make sure that you have enough food saved up. And it's a very traditional city build, but done at kind of like a micro scale. So locations don't require 1 million people to work at them. They usually require 1 or 2 or 3. And your population so far, when I have, is still like sub 100 people. And it's like level 6 or 7 right now. So it's kind of cool. And you unlock more buildings as you progress through. And different buildings require different products to be the best that they could be. There's also like desirability. So certain buildings like the inn increase desirability because people want to live near an inn. However, a building like the coal burner, who takes wood and makes coal, nobody wants to live near the coal burner, mostly because the coal burner makes a lot of smoke and people don't want to live there. So you can make your town a little more industry side, and then you can have like your residential side. People generally, what's nice is you can just drop a building in the middle of nowhere and people will get to it eventually. You can build roads to be more efficient, but you don't really need to build roads. And then you can buy land parcels that are next to you, and depending on your starting point depends on like what kind of land was available. So I have a lot of hilly lands because I started in the hills, and bought some northern lands because there'd be more woods there because I need more wood because I was running out of wood. It's a lot of balancing the flow of workers and making sure that everyone is employed and doing everything that you need them to do. So yeah, Fable Done. It's a cute little city builder game that doesn't have a lot of, there's problems to be solved, but it's not a lot of like combat or war or trying to defend your village like a game like Stronghold would be, a difference to it.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you like it?
Yeah, I do like it. I think it's fun. I think it's kind of relaxing to play through it. As long as you have a positive aspect to your town and you have housing available, people generally want to come in, but then you could just turn them away if you don't want them. But ultimately you can pull people in, and then you can balance out your workload, and it's not super stressful. Like things aren't just like exploding everywhere, which is usually what happens in some city builders, where like if you don't have like your population at the perfect level, one building doesn't get filled, and then it collapses, and then that leads to like a cascading doom spiral of everybody fleeing your town as it burns. Very different than that.
What's also very different from that is the topic of today's episode, because we're talking about a series that Seth and I are familiar with. I know Seth was a big fan of this series growing up as a child, and we'll talk about memories, but this is our Power Rangers episode, which I guess is kind of a sequel to our Godzilla episode because they are intrinsically tied to each other. Getting into our memories, what are your memories of Power Rangers?
Yeah, so I'm pretty familiar with the early Power Rangers. Very much it's kind of like Saved by the Bell, except they ended up going to fight large creatures in Megazoids. But it really is like Saved by the Bell plot plus fighting robots.
Yeah.
I think including like even tackling like serious issues. I feel like every show was like set in a high school during my time where I was attending high school or earlier, they always had like issues where like they would have serious issues that they needed to talk about. And I feel like even Power Rangers did that, where like, I don't know, they talk about like somebody having like diabetes or like the death of a parent or something. Like, I feel like that happens in Power Rangers, just like it happens in Saved by the Bell.
What I like, though, is sometimes what happens in their real life is also connected to the giant monster that attacks town.
Oh,
so,
sure.
like, it's like, oh, everyone's feeling really depressed today. Turns out there's a clown demon sucking away happiness, and he's going to grow huge.
And all the enemies are gigantic.
Well, they start small and then they grow big.
And I'm familiar with the Rita laugh. And like her like screaming about being trapped in places and stuff like that. Her just yelling just lives rent free in my brain at all times.
After 10,000 years, I'm free. It's time to conquer Earth.
What about you, Zach? Do you have memories of Power Rangers?
Before we leave your memories, though, I don't know if you remember. I know about this because I found it, and Mom read it to us when she went through our baby boxes.
Oh, was there a childhood book based on Power Rangers?
No, it was a book that you wrote called If I Was Principal for a Day. And you said that no one could do math and you'd watch Power Rangers all day.
Yeah, it was a good show. It was like one of those weird shows that like people in my generation, they either got really into it or they grew out of it. And I grew out of it. I didn't like continue to watch Power Rangers. Not that anything against anybody who continues to watch and love Power Rangers, but like I got left behind on the iterations upon iterations of the different versions of Power Rangers, because I think we'll talk about a little bit of the different versions as they come along. There's a lot, and I'm really only familiar with like the first one. The kids there, they were very like chill. They got abducted by an alien that kind of looked like a dispenser of gumballs, and also Zordon.
Well, there's Alpha 5, who's the robot that looks like a gumball machine.
Yeah.
And then, Zordon's just a floating head.
Yeah. And these kids, they were like kidnapped by these folks, and then were like, hey, you need to fight people because you're chosen. And I think the kids were like, nah. And they left, and then eventually were coerced to join and become Power Rangers, which I just think is funny that they're like forced essentially to go and fight things and be like slaves to this Zordon creature.
In terms of my memories, I was born in 93, which was around the time that Power Rangers started airing in the United States, and it ran from 93 to 96. So by the time I probably would have started forming memories, Power Rangers was no longer on television. That being said, though, it definitely was in reruns, and also Power Rangers Zeo was starting out, and the other iterations as time went on. So I definitely remember watching it a little bit. I don't think I was ever super into it, but I am into its predecessor. I do really like Super Sentai, which is the predecessor to Power Rangers, which is a great segue into the history of Power Rangers. So we'll go into the history, and then we'll get into video games at some point. So don't worry, dear listeners, we're still talking about video games in this episode. But getting into the history of Power Rangers, after the success of Godzilla in 1954, the giant monster movie genre had begun to surge. More giant monster movies began to be released, becoming the tokusatsu subgenre of kaiju films. One example being the films from Dai-E Pictures, which was Gamera, the giant monster. The plot of Gamera, for those who don't know, is it's like Godzilla, except Gamera is a turtle who can shoot rockets from his feet.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It is fun. He's also a friend to the children. Anyway, there were also early television tokusatsu and kaiju shows starting in around the 1960s, such as Tsuburayara's Productions' Ultra Q. Ultra Q, often described as almost like the Twilight Zone, in the sense that every episode is unique. Ultra Q would later be spun off into Ultraman, which became widely more successful. Ultraman, instead of being every episode different, focused on one character who wore spandex and can turn into a giant superhero who fought monsters. Tokusatsu really did see a boom, though, in the 1970s, as more and more Godzilla films came out, and they started to become more kid-friendly and also a bit ridiculous. Also, television shows were still being produced and becoming a larger part of the Japanese TV landscape. In 1975, Toei released Himitsu Sentai Goranger, created by Shotaro Ishinomori, who was also the person who created Kamen Rider. Himitsu Sentai Goranger would be the very first of the Super Sentai series, a series that featured a color-coordinated team of superheroes who would fight monsters. It would also draw heavy influence from Tetsuo Yoshida's anime Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, released in the United States as Battle of the Planets. Both, though, Gatchaman and Super Sentai are shows that feature color-coordinated superheroes, and the early design of the Super Sentai Rangers really do look like Gatchaman people just brought to life. Go Ranger and its immediate successor, JAKQ Dengekite, contain a lot of tropes that we would learn to love about Super Sentai. Big explosions, silly props, crazy-looking monsters, color-coordinated superheroes, but they were missing one thing: giant robots.
It wasn't until Marvel Comics stepped in did we get our first giant robot. In 1978, Toei teamed up with Marvel Comics to create the show Spider-Man, sometimes stylized in American media as Supai-daman, loosely based on the comic The Amazing Spider-Man. However, instead of Peter Parker, Toei's version followed Toyuka Yamashura, a 22-year-old motocross racer who gains the abilities of Spider-Man when he dons a protective suit that is given to him by some weird alien space god. His suit allows him to climb walls, swing webs from a special bracelet, sense bad guys, and also summon a giant robot named Leopardon. Is this a live action show?
It sure is.
And only in Japan, I assume? Or did it go to America?
No, only in Japan.
I was like, this sounds wild, and also something that the American media would never watch. A fun fact about the show was that the giant robot was only actually featured in the first few episodes. The suit was stolen from the set, and thus Toei had to recycle stock footage they had already shot for scenes they wanted it to appear in. Don't worry. Recycling stock footage becomes something that everybody does. Also, at one point in time, Spider-Man says he's an emissary from hell, and another point in time, he shoots people with a submachine gun because he's a hero, and also, this is not an American Spider-Man show. And Zach just put in a clip from the show, and if you could just imagine a really bad cosplayer dressing up as Spider-Man holding a submachine gun. He would look like he's robbing the joint if he wasn't wearing the full outfit of a Spider-Man costume versus just the mask. Toei and Marvel didn't stop working together, and they actually went on to go create a Super Sentai series in 1979 called Battle Fever J, which features a superhero team made up of color-coordinated team members named after countries. The team consists of Battle France, Battle Cossacks, Battle Kenya, Battle Japan, and of course, Miss America.
Now, the Super Sentai series expanded through the 1980s and the rest of the Showa period with Denji Man, Sun Vulcan, Goggle V, Dynaman, Bioman, Changeman, Flashman, Maskman, and Liveman. With the beginning of the Heisei era, we had Turbo Ranger, Five-Man, and my personal favorite, Chojin Sentai, Jetman. Jetman is really fun. It's your usual Sentai flair, so, color-coordinated youth, they fight monsters with mechs. They also fly a lot because they are, in fact, jetmen. What's really fun is it's very melodramatic. So it's like watching a soap opera where you have these people that are like talking about relationships and like there's all this drama going on. And then toward the end of the episode, they have to fight a giant monster in a mech. You'll have like one story, for example. There's a character named White Swan. She is the White Ranger. And she gets injured during a fight and she believes that she can't walk due to the fact that she has such traumatic stress from the battle that she's just unable to do combat anymore and she's confined to a wheelchair. There's a part of the episode where Red Hawk, who is one of the Red Ranger, and Black Condor, the Black Ranger, are spying on her because they think that she's faking it, and she falls out of her wheelchair and they just watch her suffer. And the episode ends with them all getting into a mech and fighting a monster.
That sounds like early X-Men.
Yeah, so there's all this drama. Red Hawk and Black Condor are always in a rivalry. They always have this love triangle with White Swan.
But they don't believe that she's telling the truth.
Well, so they think that she is, they don't think, they have done scans and nothing is medically wrong with her, so they think it's all in her head.
Oh, okay. was going to be like, if they love her, then they're like, you're faking.
I mean, they're basically doing that. After Jetman came probably the most influential of the Super Sentai shows, Kyoru Sentai Zyuranger, which debuted in 1992. While from a distance, it may seem like your usual flair, a team of color-coordinated rangers fighting giant monsters, it became very important due to the fact that it got picked up by an American studio known as Saban, named after the head of the company, Haim Saban.
Haim Saban is a hilarious figure, and he is really a very important piece to not only Power Rangers, but a number of different franchises that essentially he co-opted to do. Like Haim Saban was very good at taking foreign shows and converting them to be Americanized. That was one of his skills, and doing it cheaply.
He was also good with like scoring things like He-Man and stuff like that. I think was connected to him.
Yeah. He was a great marketer. The idea to bring Sentai over to the US went back to Marvel's collaboration with Toei. One of their joint productions, Taiyo Sentai Sun Vulcan, was toyed with as being a potential candidate to be brought over to the US market. Stan Lee would try to option it to various TV stations, but no one took it on. At some point, Haim Saban would travel to Japan, and while he's there, he would watch Shoden-shi Bioman on his TV, and he loved the idea of a group of superheroes, and in 1985 would produce a pilot for an American adaptation called Bioman. The pilot failed to pick up any attention, however. A few years later, in 1992, Fox Kids had its new CEO, Margaret Loesch. Her previous job was with Marvel Productions, and she had experience with the Super Sentai brand. So Saban was able to get in right at the top with his idea. Saban would go on to obtain the distributions right for Zyuranger, and instead of remaking the show from scratch or simply dubbing it, they took the footage from the show and reshot entire sequences with a new cast. And thus, they created the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Because the Zyurangers and most of the Sentai, I think all of the Sentai, whenever they're fighting, they're in suits.
Yeah, majority of it is. Yeah.
And you can't see what the people look like under the suits. And Saban kind of figured that out. And it's very noticeable that he figured this out and he spliced things in, because they really didn't shoot many new scenes with the villain known as Rita Repulsa in Power Rangers. So you can actually see that her mouth isn't perfectly synced to the new dialogue because they just dubbed in new audio. And the quality in the video would also substantially change between the footage from Zyuranger and the newer footage for the new cast. So if you're ever watching the original Power Rangers and we're like, man, whenever they're high school, it's in like HD, it would be like whatever standard D at the time that it was airing. And then when it cut to the battle sequence, you were like, this is just a little off.
Or my favorite is if you're ever wondering why the battle begins in Angel Grove but always ends up in a quarry.
That's they need to always end up in a quarry. It's important to note that Zyuranger was very different from Power Rangers. In Zyuranger, the team consists of ancient spirits. All of the Rangers are actually something like 170 million-year-old gods who represent various tribes, hence the coloring, and they took their symbols from prehistoric creatures, hence the mastodon and the pterodactyl and like the dinosaur themed in the original Power Rangers. And they were resurrected by a wizard named Barza to stop the evil witch Bandora. In Power Rangers, the characters are contemporary teens who gained the Ranger ability when they, as I would like to say, abducted by a giant face named Zordon. As Zordon's kind of like a benevolent alien god who's in a dispute with Rita Repulsa, who is an evil witch that he trapped on the moon but was accidentally awoken, that Rita was. So Zordon banished this lady to the moon, and then she was pissed that she was trapped there, and so Zordon, unable to actually fight Rita himself except to banish her to the moon originally, abducts children from the planet that he lives on and forces them to fight. He's very Cold War-ish, and arguably Rita's evil, but I mean, she was trapped on a moon. The Rangers deal with your usual run of high school teenage shenanigans, and then whatever is happening in the town of Angel Grove would occasionally be wrapped up into the hijinks of Rita Repulsa and her desire to conquer the Earth. They were not 170 million-year-old gods fighting an evil witch. They were in fact just children working for a weird alien.
Now, Power Rangers was an instant success. It became an incredibly popular show in terms of viewership and merchandise. Because if there's one thing Haim Saban knew what to do, it was how to make a show sell toys. And let me tell you, there are a ton of Power Ranger toys. The first 3 seasons would run from 1993 until 1996, with the second and third season actually having to source footage from 2 different Sentai shows, Gosei Sentai Dai Ranger and Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger, because in fact Power Rangers had outrun Zyuranger and they ran out of footage, so they had to take footage from other Rangers. And it's funny that they like come up with like background reasons for why the Rangers are suddenly in a different outfit, but it's because they literally sourced it from different shows. Following the end of season 3, the show would rebrand as Mighty Morphin Alien Rangers for a short 10 episodes, which adapted Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger. The 4th season would officially pick up as Power Rangers Zeo, using footage from Chiriki Sentai O-Ranger. The next year, 1997, the show would be worked as Power Rangers Turbo and adapt footage from Gaikiso Sentai Car Ranger. This would become the tradition going forward, with each new year basically meaning a new season of Power Rangers adapting footage from a new season of Super Sentai, sometimes occurring concurrently. So like if a new Sentai was out, it meant a new season of Power Rangers was in production. The one exception to this was in 2010, the 18th season was a rebroadcast of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers with an updated title sequence. Now, the original Power Rangers isn't without controversy. Their depictions of violence were often criticized by various parent groups. In later years, there would also be reports of poor treatment of cast and crew. In fact, Power Rangers was non-union, so cast and crew were often underpaid and worked long hours.
Arguably, the only 100% Power Rangers produced by an American studio was the movies. The first 3 actors to leave would be Austin St. John, Tu Trang, and Walter Emmanuel Jones. They played Jason the Red Ranger, Trini the Yellow Ranger, and Zach the Black Ranger, all respectively. They left during the second season due to dispute with their contracts and reportedly attempting to unionize. David Yost, who played the Blue Ranger, he was the nerdy guy, would be one of the last original actors to leave in 1996, and in a 2010 interview, he reported that he would be bullied by staff for being gay, and also reportedly walked off set due to being called the F-slur too many times. Despite the controversies, the show would continue on with, as of 2023, over 30 seasons and over 970 episodes. So if you want to get into Power Rangers, there's a lot. By 2001, they have raked up over $6 billion in toy sales. Similarly, Super Sentai itself would continue to churn out new seasons, with the 49th season beginning to air in February of 2025. Throughout the run of Super Sentai shows, they would even reference Power Rangers. The show Toku Mi Sentai Go Busters would even use It's Morphin Time as a call out for the team to turn into their Sentai Rangers. The first film, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, would release 1995 and would not use any archive footage from the previous Sentai shows, being the first Power Rangers production to do so. It was set between seasons 2 and 3, but with some elements of non-canon to seasons 3 storyline. A standalone sequel, Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, would release in 1997. There was also a reboot film called Power Rangers, released in 2017, which loosely adapts the first 3 episodes of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The film would feature Bryan Cranston as Zordon and Elizabeth Banks as Rita.
Now let's talk about video games, because that's what the show's about. And it only took us about as long as it did to get to this point. The Power Rangers franchise is massive. There are a ton of games. Before Power Rangers came out in the US, though, there were, of course, video games based on the Super Sentai franchise. So we'll at least mention a few of those. The first appearance of a Sentai character in a video game was 1990's Karaoke Studio by Tosei and Banpresto. This game featured different characters from Japanese media and also functioned as a karaoke device. In fact, the cartridge doesn't look like a cartridge. It looks like a weird brick that has plugs in it because you plug a microphone into the system and it has voice recognition software inside. The Rangers, though, from the 1987 series Hikari Sentai Mask Man, make an appearance in the game. One of the first dedicated dedicated Sentai games would be Chojin Sentai Jetman in 1991 for the Famicom. It's an action platformer developed by Natsume and published by Angel. Each Jetman appears and has different attacks and various hit points, depending on who you play as. In 1992, Kyoto Sentai Zyuranger for the Famicom was released. Developed by Arc System, and also I believe published by Angel, you take on the role of the different Zyurangers in an action platformer where you must stop the evil witch Bandora and various monsters that serve her. The game occasionally appears on bootleg multicarts under the name Power Rangers. So I guess it's technically the first Power Rangers video game.
That's right. And surprisingly, they didn't just take it and change it around to sell it.
No, I'm actually kind of shocked they didn't either, but I guess 1992, it would have just been a little too late. The first official Power Rangers game that officially would get released would be Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Gear, and Game Boy. And let me tell you, these aren't just 4 games that are kind of similar to each other. These are 4 different versions that are developed by different companies and play entirely differently. They just all have the same name. There was Natsume's Super Nintendo version, Nova's Genesis version, Sims, the Game Gear version, and a company called Tom Create developing the Game Boy version. The SNES and Game Boy versions were published by Bandai. Sega took care of their own. The SNES version is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. There are 7 stages, with each stage featuring you first playing as the teenager, and then you turn into the Power Ranger. After beating the beat-em-up segments, the gameplay changes into a fighting game where you play as a Megazord and have to fight against a giant monster. The Game Boy version simplifies this, but it's basically the same game.
The Genesis version is a one-on-one competitive fighting game, which is dramatically different than the SNES game. There's a scenario mode where you fight computer-controlled opponents and a battle mode where you play against a friend. You play as one of the Rangers and you fight monsters. Also, while fighting a monster, it will turn into a giant version of itself, and you will then go and battle in a Megazord. You can also unlock the Green Ranger and the Dragon Zord. Next up, and tied in with the movie, is the game Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, released in 1995. Similar to the first Power Rangers game, there are also different versions for the SNES, Game Boy, Genesis, and Game Gear. Natsume would once again develop the SNES version, and Tom Create would develop the Game Boy version. Sims would do both the Genesis and the Game Gear version. The SNES version is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, though this time you can move up and down on a 3D plane. Oddly enough, the game isn't really based on the movie. Rather, it ties into storyline elements from season 2 of the TV show. You fight through swarms of putty units and then fight off Ivan Ooze, who is actually from the movie. There aren't any Megazord battles in this game. Also play as a teenager version of each character. So, fun fact, the cool part of the Power Rangers taken out of this game, and the lame part of the Power Rangers added in. You can play as a kid, or you can play as a kid in a suit. What about those cool robots? Negative. To become the Ranger, you have to charge your morphin meter, and then it is in fact morphing time. You will change into the Ranger and be given more powerful attacks. If you play through the mission entirely as one of the teens, you will automatically morph when you reach a boss. The Game Boy version is somewhat simplified, though instead of playing as the characters in their civilian clothes, they start each mission in their Ninja Ranger outfit from the movie. Now, breaking from whatever Tom and Natsume did, Sims would again go and create something different. The Genesis version is also not really an adaptation of the movie, but rather adapts Season 2's episodes White Light, The Ninja Encounter, and Power Transfer. You can play with up to 2 players, and you do get to control the Zords of a given character, which is great. Sims, in fact, went and looked at what made Power Rangers fun, and then decided to make a game where you can control the Zords. There are 9 characters to play as: Tommy, Kimberly, Billy, Rocky, Aisha, Adam, Jason, Trini, and Zach. And what's interesting is the voice lines from the other actors are used if you select Jason, Trini, or Zach, because the actors had already been released from their contract, which is sad but also kind of funny. It would be even funnier if there was no quality checks and they just assigned random voices to the three characters.
I might need to be fact-checked on this, but I think I read that when they were developing the game, Sims was like, oh, we'd really like to include the older Power Rangers, and Saban was like, well, we just released them from their contract. You can just use other voice actors, though. We don't care.
The Game Gear version is similar to the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers games for the Game Gear in that it's a fighting game with identical gameplay and game modes. The one major difference is that there is a super move you can charge up and perform, which is great. I think Sims understood Power Rangers assignment better than Natsume.
The SNES would get another Power Rangers game in 1995 called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition, which was a competitive 2D fighter developed by Natsume. Officially, the game was only released on the SNES, but there is a bootleg port to the Genesis by an unknown developer. Once again, pirates bring things to consoles that don't belong. Instead of playing as individual Rangers, you take on the role of either a Megazord or a villain. The final boss in the game is Ivan Ooze, who becomes playable after defeating him. I like that this game said, hey, what is the best part of Power Rangers? The giant monsters. Let's only do that. Following this game was, in 1996, Power Rangers Zeo Battle Racers for the Super Nintendo, a racing game based on Power Rangers Zeo, the show. The game was developed, once again by Natsume. It features Mode 7 style graphics as you race and battle different vehicles. As we move into the PS1 and N64 era, there were less games based on the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers because the show was moving into its other seasons and other iterations. Soon, games would start adapting the new Power Rangers that would come out. We, of course, would be remiss not to talk about Power Rangers Zeo versus the Machine Empire, released in 1996 for the Bandai Apple Pippin, which Seth and I talked about way back when we did our Pippin episode, which I think might have been like 5 years ago. But yeah, Power Rangers Zeo is really bad for the Apple Pippin. Seth and I watched a video of it and we reacted to it while we were recording, and we both said it was miserable. Moving away from that, there was Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, which was based on the show of the same name, released for the PS1, N64, and Game Boy Color. And once again, it is 3 different games. The PS1 version is an isometric beat-em-up. The Game Boy Color version is a platformer. The N64 version is probably the best known out of all 3 of these because it's the one that everyone hates, and everyone likes talking about how much they hate it. It's a somewhat open-world action game where you go across different maps and complete different missions. Some of these missions are mini games that require you to like fly a ship in a shoot 'em up segment or pick up boxes. One of the main problems though is that people just find the game to be boring and repetitive.
Following Lightspeed Rescue, Power Rangers Time Force would be released in 2001. Again, this game would be released across multiple platforms and perform entirely different across them. The Game Boy Color version was a side-scrolling platform, the GBA version was a beat-em-up, and the PlayStation version was a 3D action game. Kind of actually reminds me of the game that Zach had me play in my Retro Rewind. In the years that followed, a lot of Power Rangers games would be primarily just one-off adaptations of whatever show was popular at the time. Wild Force in 2002, Ninja Storm in 2003, Dino Thunder in 2004, SPD in 2005. In 2007, however, A2M would release Power Rangers Super Legends for the 15th anniversary of the show. As it's an anniversary, it features Power Rangers from the first 15 season. The plot revolves around the return of Lord Zed and his attempts to disrupt the time stream to wipe out all of the Rangers. We could probably keep going, but this episode is already probably pretty long. However, we do want to mention at least 3 more titles. We should make an honorable mention to Chroma Squad, developed in 2015 by Behold. The game is not officially a Power Rangers game, but is heavily inspired by it. It's a tactical RPG where a team of stunt actors start their own tokusatsu series. You fight various monsters of the week, and in each episode of the fictional show, your studio is filming. Your goal is to get high ratings to increase the revenue and improve the studio. There is also another anniversary game, this time celebrating 25 years of history, is Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, which is apparently a game that has a ton of expansion packs and was released September 24th of 2019. It's a fighting game where you fight with all the Power Rangers across all of the Power Rangers spectrum, possibly purchased with DLC.
Also, Street Fighter characters show up.
Because it's DLC. You can just buy whatever you want, but it is an anniversary game that covers all the Power Rangers, especially if you have money. In 2024, a retro-inspired throwback beat-em-up by Digital Eclipse was released called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. The game features a robot version of Rita Repulsa who has traveled back in time to assist her past self. The game is available on PS4, PlayStation 5, Windows, Xbox One, Xbox Series XS, and Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, Battle for the Grid is, I think, supposed to be pretty good. It actually features a lot of returning cast members, such as Austin St. John, and it is the last Power Rangers performance of Jason David Frank, who played Tommy in the original Power Rangers, the Green Ranger, before he passed away in 2022. Now, that will do it for our Power Rangers episode. Getting into our Retro Rewind, Seth had me play Monty Python's Flying Circus, the computer game, released for MS-DOS in 1990, developed by Core Design and published by Virgin. The game is a shoot-'em-up that is very much like playing a Monty Python episode, or specifically just the animated segments of the Monty Python episode. You play as Gumby, who is a character that originally was played by John Cleese but made popular by Graham Chapman. He is the kind of... he's always like making faces and stuff, and I think he wears like a weird like white thing on his head. Anyway, you play as Gumby. You go through various nonsensical worlds fighting things that fly at you, like flying feet. You throw fish, and occasionally the game will be stopped by a message. Sometimes it will say, game over, and then it will just continue. It's silly. I like it. It's silly in a sense of like nonsensical humor, like the show Monty Python's Flying Circus, and I think that kind of humor it's good in small doses, but I did like this game. Next week, Seth, you can play Mohawk and Headphone Jack for the Super Nintendo.
Great, I'm excited for that. Zach had me play Warriors of Might and Magic, developed and published by the 3DO Company. The game was released for the PlayStation and the Game Boy Color in 2000, and in the PlayStation 2 in 2001. Zach wanted me to play the Game Boy Color version, which was in 2D versus 3D because it was the Game Boy Color. You play as Alaron, though you wouldn't really know because you just start off in a prison and then some guys come to rescue you, and one of them gets killed by some sort of creature, and then the other one opens the door and he says, I'm freeing you, but before I go, here is my shield. And then he like teleports away. Unclear if he died or if he actually just vanished. However, giving you a shield is a nice gesture, but it could have been a sword. Probably would have been more useful. In order to get your sword, it's locked up in a prison cell next to you. You have to actually venture into the dungeon, leap over some pits where if you fall into them, you die and the game immediately restarts because you only have one life. And then it just immediately goes to the beginning where there's like this weird PowerPoint screen of a castle with lightning, and then it just goes right back into the dungeon where you're stuck again. It's like a roguelike, but if it was bad, and you started with nothing and you didn't get anything from dying. Anyway, if you can jump over the pit, you can go to a chest, grab the key, jump back over the pit, and go back over to the dungeon to unlock the sword, to then now have a sword, and now you can stab the various enemies that are in the dungeon that you had to previously run by. The hardest enemy in the dungeon is the pits, because you'll run into more pits, and then you'll have to jump, and you will fall and immediately die. The game takes place from a top-down perspective, so you have to time your jumps from a top-down perspective, which is very difficult. It's not fun. The game does have some decent music, and I really didn't hate playing it, apart from the fact when I fell down a pit, it immediately restarted the game, which was just annoying. The reviews at the time also kind of had the same thought that I did, where the game could not get higher than 50% on any sort of marking, sometimes going as low as 20% on ratings, including all three of their versions. PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 game weren't that much better. Game Informer, though, however, gave the Game Boy Color version a 7.75 out of 10, which I think is very generous. It's not worth it on the Game Boy Color. I recommend don't play it. I don't know if it doesn't really hold up. Next week, Zach, you can play Battle Tanks with an X for the Game Boy Color.
Will do. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode. If you have any memories playing any of the Power Rangers games, let us know. You can email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on social media. Look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're also available on our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.